Can you sort of walk us through what is it about the dispute resolution process, just briefly, that makes it so hard to automate from, end to end?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the main issue is that there's no one size fits all when it comes to dispute resolution. It's easy to automate a rule, right? If a scenario X happens, do Y, but we're humans working with other humans, so things that aren't expected or scenarios, the first time I see this kind of scenarios pop up all the time. So you can't really foresee and automate every single scenario just because of the variety of issues that could potentially come up.
Mhm. And is it a case that you can't even sort of create an exception workflow for these cases? Are they always completely different, or do they follow some patterns? Or yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to generalize because for every company, a dispute complexity and exception workflows would be different. So for VersaPay, because we have payments and software, we could have exceptions on payments side of things or on software side of things, and the approach to them would be completely different. I would say on payments side of things, it could be easier to automate exceptions because you could only run into a limited amount of scenarios, which is they would still be vast, but it's as you would counter a certain kind of error, and then there's certain things you can try to address it. When it comes to software and services in general, I think it's a little bit more complex because of the variety of issues that you might encounter. It could be some kind of software error, it could be service that's not working as expected, it could be pricing, it could be just different expectations on how information is presented on the invoice. So I'd say there's more human factor, and the closer the company is to the service industry, the wider the range of possibilities is.
Is it possible to actually automate, say, I don't know, some percentage of it, say 60%, create exceptions for the remaining 40%? Is that realistic?
I think so. Again, it depends on the kind of business that the company is in, but there are always ways to automate. You want to empower your clients to self-serve and resolve issues when they need it, right? We could be working in different time zones, like you and I, where perhaps when I need an answer, the other party is not available in those hours. So you do want to provide that power and that information to your clients to resolve as much as possible. And I would probably strive to automate more than 60% of cases like that, where they would just be able to find this information independently without reaching out to anyone. But for the remaining 40% or however much that is, the scenarios that once you kind of have this infrastructure of intuitive, easy to understand self-service resources, what you're left with is likely an array of complex cases that actually requires a human to touch it.
Based on what you're saying, is it right to say that the time savings that automation gives you, it kind of makes the collections process a bit more human, brings you closer to your customers? Would that be accurate?
I think so because, like I said, when you automate and resolve a lot of the simpler questions, you're able to free up the time and resources on your team to face the more complex cases. So they're able to address it with a lot more attention, with a lot more focus on the customer. They're able to do more research and generally be more available in those situations when they're not constantly boggled down with a lot of the simple answers and simple questions that they don't necessarily need to be involved with. So I think just that bandwidth of additional focus when you're only focusing on complex scenarios, those would also be more interesting to work from the party who is resolving the issue. You don't want to do the same thing over and over. It's more interesting to work on something that's unique and complex.
But are there any specific activities within the dispute management and resolution process that you think lend themselves well to automation?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? The activities that are geared towards automation or the other way?
That are well suited for automation?
Yes, I think perhaps generally availability of reporting. A lot of the, if we're generalizing and kind of trying to talk about the wider group of companies, a lot of the times that you would get the question about an invoice would be, what is this charge? Why am I charged this much? So just empowering your customers to have the reporting so that there's transparency and kind of democratize data so that they can get a lot of those answers on their own. Why am I billed this much? Well, this contract is available to you with the pricing that you have. And this is the report that you have on your usage that can show you why we're using the numbers that we're using. So I think availability of reporting and addressing the simpler questions that come up more often in how do you calculate this fee? Well, there's a little FAQ for you in how these fees are calculated. Just making this easy and transparent, I think those are good cases for automation.
I'm interested in why, like just digging a bit deeper into why exactly those use cases were the ones you singled out. So starting with reporting, right? Are you saying it's good for automation because it takes too much time on their side? Or is it because customers find it kind of painful? Like, what's the deeper reason there?
I think it's good for automation first and foremost because it's easy to create a workflow or of, if this happens, do this. Um, and it's also removing a lot of the friction. We, as suppliers and customers, they both really have the same goal, right? They want payments to flow seamlessly and they want services to flow uninterrupted. Um, so I think it's about giving the customers the information to address those issues themselves, um, making it easy to do so. And specifically speaking of automation, it's because it's easy to determine if this happens or if this is the question, this is the workload that we're following. It's repetitive, documentable, and it's the same scenario that can be repeated.
Is there a danger of over automation within the customer, the dispute management process?
Oh, okay.
Is
Yeah,
there,
I get that.
yeah.
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. While we always want to give our clients, as much information and power to self-serve as possible, we never want to make them feel like it's impossible for them to reach a human when they're stuck and they need help. I think you and I, as consumers of goods and services, would probably face the situation at one point or another when we're stuck with a chatbot on a website who keeps running the same answer in circles and seems to completely ignore your request to speak to an agent, to a human. So that's not very customer centric, right? I think the goal is to empower your customer with the tools that they need to resolve simpler questions as they come up, but then to also be there to support them in more unique and complex cases. And it shouldn't be hard for them to reach you. There is an easy way. With VersaPay's collaborative AR tool, there is a little comment box that's tied to every invoice. So a client can send a question that's related to a specific invoice and get a specific answer in real time. It doesn't have to be a conversation that happens in the same time zone, right? I'm working at 9 p.m. and I can send this question, and the human that logs in the morning can review it and answer it.
So, if I'm hearing you right, that's kind of a good way of just maintaining a human touch while having the automation going on. When you're sort of setting the boundaries of automation, right? How would you think about maintaining that balance? Well, just to avoid that risk of over automation in an open-ended way, like how would you set the scope?
Yeah, I think that kind of ties to the previous question that we just talked about. It's about ease of outreach. It's you don't want to make your client feel like they're facing a wall that they can't climb over, that the chatbot is all there is. As long as it's easy to reach out to someone, I think that introduces a human touch. And then as we talked, in relation to other questions, that once your teams are not boggled down with the same repetitive tasks, it opens up the bandwidth for them to focus on the more complex ones. So that's where it comes in when we do have a case when the client needs to reach out. There's a human who's helping them, who's interested, who has a goal of addressing the question and getting the answer for them.
That was great. Thank you. So touching on those complex disputes, one advantage that we've clearly identified is that team members have more time to devote to those issues. Is there any way automation can plug into some of those issues and speed up dispute resolution within those individual cases?
I think so. It's hard to generalize, but I think while it's not always possible to automate a resolution, you can empower people on both ends of the dispute to gather information more quickly, to to research, to document the communication process. I think with automation, documentation actually becomes a lot easier because then that creates research opportunities for you. If that case happens again, maybe a year down the road, there's documentation on how this was resolved before. That's easily accessible and researchable.
How much customer collaboration is really involved, and like why is that necessary?
Well, I think any dispute is a two-way interaction, right? It's typically customer initiated because you've already the first interaction happened, the supplier has posted an invoice, and then the second interaction comes in when the client opens a dispute. Actually, I think it's a good thing when the customer decides to open a dispute. Of course, we want to proactively minimize the root causes that cause dispute to occur in the first place. But if something did go wrong and the dispute did happen, I think it's a good sign that the customer would open it because it shows engagement. It shows that they have a question, they're willing to work with you to resolve it. And the more complex the scenario is, the more collaboration is required. So I might need additional information from the customer. I might have the customer pull in their engineering teams or other teams. The more teams you're starting to pull in, the more collaborative and complex the resolution process becomes.
Complex situations that needed this kind of customer collaboration. Was there any way automation helped in those cases? Some real life scenario that you've encountered?
Hmm. That's that's difficult to give examples of because every difficult scenario is different. I'd say probably the most complex issues that I've had to touch um, were in cases when something doesn't match. So I, customer, see number X on my platform, and then I, as supplier, see a different number for the same metric. And there could be a number of different things that could have caused it. Maybe there is some kind of backend product error that caused it. Maybe there are some filters that are not applied correctly on one side or the other. So I'd say when we're looking at the same thing but seeing different things, it's difficult to resolve. And the more as you're starting to investigate, you might be pulling more and more teams, and it becomes difficult to stay on timeline, to get answers quickly, to stay on top of the teams and follow-ups. But it helps when all of that happens in a place where you can consolidate all of the communication in one place. So I'll give you an example. In our collaborative AR platform, you're actually able to have both internal and external conversations happening on the same dialogue. You can post an answer just to the teams internally so that they're aware of some updates that maybe you've had while working on the resolution, and you can also post updates that are facing the customer. All of that can happen in the same place, and then next time when I need to refer to this, or maybe I'm reporting on this issue, all of that interaction is in the same place.
That's great. Just digging into that example a bit more, when you said, the customer is seeing one thing and you're internally seeing one thing from an like, what number would that be? Because I'm thinking from an AR perspective, it's usually an invoice or a payment status, right?
Right, but your invoice could be related to different metrics, right? You could be billing maybe for a good that was shipped but not delivered, or it could be a count of something. So when we talk about software, maybe it's a count of invoices that were processed in a certain period, and that's not something that's not matching. So I wouldn't say it's more so about, this invoice exists for me, but it doesn't exist for the other party, but more so, what does this invoice contain? And do we have the same view of what is on it?
Okay. And in terms of collaboration, and I'm going back to our automation discussion, what sort of automation has helped you collaborate better with my teams?
Let me think. Well, we VersaPay, we use our own collaborative AR product to deliver invoices to clients. So from that perspective, I think it's just the maintenance of everyone staying on schedule. If there's a dispute open, the team that's relevant to it gets notifications. When something goes unanswered for a little while, it's a reminder that gets sent. So when it comes to dispute resolution, I think it's very important to stay on schedule, to provide answers in a reasonable time frame. So I think from that perspective, automation really helps.
Right. And just taking that example, for example, payment reminders, right? It can be considered sensitive communication. Um, how do you sort of go about creating this automation while presenting an empathetic side? Like, what's your thought process behind that?
That's interesting. I think what you said about empathetic um, approach is important. It's important to keep in mind that we both sides of the dispute are working towards the same goal. We both want to get this invoice paid. We both want to make sure that the services keep flowing uninterrupted. So I think just keeping it in mind that both sides are working towards the same goal is important in ensuring that dispute management is approached from an empathetic um, and from a standpoint of trying to help versus trying to point fingers or um, do anything unproductive really.
Yeah. Would you ever back that up with, say, a human-based outreach? For example, you send a payment reminder, let's say it's in 90 days past due, which is clearly a serious sort of case. Would you then back up that communication with maybe a human touch just to they're more empathetic and say, oh, hey, we're still trying to resolve this, but you still need to pay up, right? So just striking that balance. Um, yeah, do you think you would inject some human touches there? Just
Yeah,
moving
absolutely, and
things?
that's what our process currently involves. The automated payment reminders are very helpful, and I think they address the majority of the issue. But when they keep going and they're not answered, and the system can tell you when something was delivered, if your reminder has been opened or not. So if it's a reminder that has been sent but maybe not received, then it's a question of whether you have the right contact. So you would just go and make sure that it's a human task, right? That needs to go in and ensure that we have the right contacts, that these reminders are being sent to the right people. Or if you do have the right people and the reminders are still not working, you do have to introduce an element of human touch to make sure that there aren't maybe any customer concerns that are open with other teams that are preventing this invoice from getting paid.
That sounds like a good example of um, automation just making AR more human. Would that be accurate to say?
I think so. Automation helps. It helps you address a lot of the smaller issues, a lot of the simpler tasks that you don't necessarily want to burden your team with. But then when it comes to more complex cases, you do want the human to touch it.
Yeah. And how would you, when you're designing the workflow itself, like how would you um, pinpoint those places where, okay, this is where we need a human intervention? Like, how would you think about that?
Yeah, I think from finance, because I come from a finance background, it would be different metrics. It would be dollar value and aging of the account in question. So for speaking dollar value, high dollar value, you would want to start to introduce a human a little bit earlier on, versus if it's a low dollar value, you can allow it to age a little bit more before it becomes a concern. So it's striking the balance between the two. You want to always make sure that you have the right balance between how old the account gets and um, how big in a value that account is.
Do you have any benchmarks in mind or any particular numbers?
You would gauge that based on your average deal. If you have, an average deal, you probably want to maintain kind of one-on-one relationship between aging and value. And if you're talking something that's double the average size of your deal, you do want to start getting a human there maybe twice as fast as something that's halfway below your average deal.
Oh, that's great. That's a good guideline. Um, so let's say we do have automation in our processes. How would you maintain transparency with customers? Because customers might end up instancing it, right? They say that, okay, a machine made this, but they might still want some sort of human interaction, even in a simple case. How do you maintain that trust? The customer saying that it's automated, but it's still fair. How would you communicate that?
Well, that question is a little bit difficult for me to think through, because if you already have transparency, if your client understands what they're being invoiced for and how and why, then that should in itself eliminate the need for a dispute. But again, if there is a need for a dispute, then you just make it easy for them to reach out to a human, and then you make sure that the human who's working with them stays on top of updates. If the resolution taking a little bit longer than maybe the customer has expected, just providing regular updates of we're working on this issues. This is 1, 2, 3 reasons why it's taking a little bit longer than we expected, but this is the progress that we've made so far. Just staying in touch, and I think providing a reassurance that a customer is not forgotten, somebody's working on that issue, and we are going to get them answers.
Right. And any organization that we're just speaking broadly now, any organization that's looking to automate their resolution processes while maintaining that human, right? What would be some best practices that you would give them?
Yes, I think, well, we talked a little bit about providing information to empower clients to self-serve. When it comes to more complex cases, I think the way I think about it is that automation does not have to replace the human touch, but it can help enhance it. So you want to strike a balance between automation and ease of connection. So you want to create intuitive, user-friendly resources for your customers to address their questions in the timelines that they want, in the way that they want. But then you also want to have your AR team available to answer questions that are more complex as they come up.